not all of these fees are being properly passed on to the end merchant or to the platform.
So James, I really enjoyed our interview with Ken today.
Me too.
And I think I want to warn everybody before they get into the podcast. We get into the weeds a little bit this time, but
this is for people who actually care about payment processing.
It's very. I think Ken had some really insightful information to share with everybody. So, and then I really liked your question from the field. We haven't talked about that topic in a while.
Yeah, we kind of did a follow-up. And so again, this is kind of the episode for payments experts. If you care about payment processing, you're going to love Ken talking about these card brand fees and how they really work and the complexity of that. And then I go right into, okay, how do we leverage that to make money? And I talk about merchant cost consulting, where you can help a merchant without switching their processing and make some money in the process. And then Patty, tell us about the insiders today.
We talk about some of the what I like to call interlopers who have come into the payment space. Namely Toast and Square. There's some really interesting goings on in this industry, and this is just a small part of that.
Yeah, I love it. Well, before we dive in, I do want to clarify that neither Ken or his company is a paid sponsor, advertiser, consulting client, anything like that. Just a fantastic person, been in the industry for a long time and has an incredible story. You're going to enjoy hearing his story. So let's go ahead and dive right in and get started with this interview today.
Hey, everybody. James and I are here today with Ken Musante. How you doing, Ken?
Very well. Thank you, James and Patty. It's an honor to be here. Thank you.
It's great to have you. Ken and I go way back. We started writing for the Green Sheet at about the same time, 20 odd years ago. When I had more dark hair and Ken had more hair.
Our video listeners will understand that one.
Will understand that, yeah. But anyway, Ken, I know you've had a long and storied career in merchant services, and we always like to give everybody sort of a feel for who our interviewees are. So maybe if you could share some highlights of your career. And also, I'm interested because I never asked you this. How exactly did you get into merchant services?
Yeah, so unlike most people that fell into merchant services, I actually got into it right out of college. So this has been the entirety of my career. But out of college, I went to work for Wells Fargo Bank on the issuing side and spent 4 years there. It was a wonderful place to start, getting to see all aspects of the card issuing side before working for Wells Fargo's acquiring side, managing a tech support desk.
Okay.
Subsequent to that, I had the chance to start a program for a small community bank called Humboldt Bank. Started it, set up the BIN and ICA, provisioned the account to our processor, which at the time was First Data, and then brought on the sponsored ISOs, First Card Service International, and then Electronic Card Systems. And as we saw the business evolve, progress, and saw where the margins were going, we said, maybe we should be setting up our own book. And so we started doing additional servicing for the ISOs, and then moved into having our own proprietary or bank-owned portfolio, and did that for 10 years under Humboldt Bank. At that point, the founding CEO retired, a new CEO came in and said, as a NASDAQ traded stock, I'm having difficulty explaining this national portfolio to potential investors. So he sold the merchant services side to a privately owned bank, First National Bank Arizona, First National Bank in Nevada. They spun out Humboldt Merchant Services as a standalone company, and then I ran it for 5 years for them. That was a fabulous opportunity as well. Again, being a bank-owned ISO, one of the very few, unfortunately, they were also very invested in the mortgage market. And
I remember that.
2008, they failed. I can do an entirely new podcast on
how you deal with that. Yes, I bet.
The FDIC, and I have a lot of empathy with what some of the folks at SVB went through.
Yeah.
And wrote an article on that experience. So from there, Moneris Solutions purchased us from the FDIC. I helped with the integration into Monera Solutions. We sold out the name and the high-risk business to Mark Gardner, and I'm very pleased that that business is thriving and the name lives on. And then I went and joined a small startup ISO called Eureka Payments, a direct-to-merchant ISO. Managed that for 9 years. And then we had a really large PayFac, one of the very first PayFacs that just grew exponentially. And I said, that's where I want to go. And so I went to work for WePay and got to sit sidecar managing the Scrum cycles for the development team that was building out the card present solution into WePay's card not present ecosystem. And did that for 2.5 years. But 2.5 years at a big bank is a lifetime. So,
I bet. Yeah.
Wonderful people, had some great experiences and opportunity. But for personal reasons, my wife and I wanted to move to Napa. And so with that, because I'm very creative in naming my companies, I started Napa Payments and Consulting, right? So you get the theme. There's Humboldt Merchant Services, Eureka Payments, Napa Payments and Consulting. So
Love it.
He's squarely situated on the left coast, James.
Yes. Yes.
So as I said, a long and storied career. I mean,
that's incredible. Yeah, that's really, that was actually really cool. I enjoyed hearing that. That's so interesting. I was really surprised when you said the one about managing the Scrum cycles for the developers. I was like, good night, you've done everything in the industry. That must
really has,
I specifically wanted that type of an assignment so that I could understand how the sausage was made.
Yeah, I love it. That's great.
Yeah, that's really cool. Well, James, I asked Ken here today because he's really good at explaining complex things.
That's a good thing on a podcast. So.
That's always great on a podcast. And he and I just got done doing a series of retrospectives about the banking industry, about the card industry, since we were old timers and all. And in one of these articles, Ken raised the issue of fees that are assessed to merchants beyond interchange, the non-interchange fees.
Right.
And I thought this was, this whole concept of pass-through fees is really compelling. We've talked about this a lot.
Yeah.
And especially in an environment that we have now where everybody's focused on interchange, got to get rid of interchange. We got to, curb interchange. So Ken, I'd like you to kind of explain to me and our audience and James, what are these card network non-interchange pass-through fees and how do they get assessed?
Sure. So a good place to start. So when you think about a merchant's costs, there are 3 components to their cost. Whether they're charged that way or not, there are 3 components. First, and the one that we always talk about, is interchange.
Right.
It's the largest. It's paid entirely to the card issuing banks. It's publicly available. It's reversed in the instance of a return or a chargeback. Second is what's paid to the processor. The take rate, commonly thought of as what your net revenue is. Think discount fee, authorization fee, chargebacks, and the like. The third, and the subject to today's podcast, are the non-interchange pass-through fees. And we're going to use that a lot, so I might be deferring to the acronym of NIPTF. Now, these fees are so little talked about that they don't even have their own name, right? We're calling them what they're not, non-interchange pass-through fees. And although they represent the smallest component, at least for the small merchants, right? They are the fastest growing and the least understood.
Right.
These fees are paid entirely to the card network, and there's not a publicly available schedule for these fees. So just some background or basis.
Yeah. And my understanding is that the nomenclature is different as well, right?
In terms of
what the particular fees are, yeah.
So, there's over 100 different types of these, or items in here. And so, there's several different categories of these non-interchange pass-through fees.
Yeah, so it's kind of funny, Ken. One of the reasons I was excited to talk to you about this when I saw the questions, I had a very funny, interesting story to share. So when we launched ISOAMP, which is the largest statement analysis company, when I launched it several years back, we got to the point where we had created what we call matching rules. Okay. So a matching rule is basically where a non-developer is able to go in and we have all the criteria. So we can use regular expressions and say, look for a name that includes this, but doesn't include that and has a rate of this to this and, is on this type of statement, whatever, right? Any of the criteria we want. And then we could say, match it to this particular category. Well, when I actually decided, I was like, all right, I got to like personally go in. I didn't have a big team at that point. So I'm like, I'm going to go in and like build a bunch of these rules. So I literally checked into a local hotel because I have 4 kids.
Oh, I remember when you did that. Yes.
Yeah. So I checked into a local hotel. And I'll tell you what, Ken, I thought I understood these fees that we're discussing today until that 3-day stretch. And then I realized I did not. There were so many of them. It was unbelievable. You mentioned 100. And I think at that time I knew about 25 of them, and then I found the other 75 and was trying to figure out what in the world they were. So talk to us about, one thing I'm curious is, talk to us about kind of, we have Visa, MasterCard, Discover, we have American Express, like, are they all kind of similar in this, or what are the ways that they're different? Talk a little bit about that, if you would.
Yeah, I want to query you separately about checking into a hotel to getting away from your wife and kids.
Talk to my wife about it. She was the real hero of that story. That was
of course the hotel was
sure.
literally down the street too, right?
It was, yeah, but yeah. So that was very interesting. But I didn't go home. I was there for like 3 days and 3 nights getting it done. So yeah, that was all my wife's doing there. So.
And he left her with 4 kids.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Under the age of about 10, right?
Yeah.
So the problem that you just described, though, is something that many processors haven't figured out.
Right.
And not all of these fees are being properly passed on to the end merchant or to the platform. And some ISOs are not getting what their actual NIPTFs are. They're getting an average based on whatever the processor chooses to average them over, because these, the number of these fees are growing. And with some of these legacy processors, they're not necessarily able to either keep up with or calculate the same way that these fees are actually applied to the merchant. These, backing up, NIPTFs are not new, right?
Right.
The number of categories has expanded enormously.
Right.
If you go back to before the card networks were publicly traded, these fees were almost 90% the assessments, at least in the US, right? They were 9 basis points. Since then, the fee for assessments has gone up to 13 to 50 basis points. And then they've added monthly fees, which is distinct for Visa and MasterCard.
Right.
Authorization related fees in there, behavior modification fees in there, cross-border fees in there, and then they've got these fees because we can fees in there.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the total amount that are the percentage charged to merchants has effectively doubled over that period of time for most merchants, right? Some merchants are wildly skewed above that.
Right. Right. Yeah. Well, you know what? That's a great segue. Let's talk about that a little bit. So one of the main categories that we see on the statement analysis side is these international assessments. I can't tell you how many times we've had a client reach out to our team and say, you messed up the analysis because you're showing that the card brand fees are, 0.5% or whatever. And there's no way it's that high. It's marked up, because they don't understand that there actually is a fee that's charged by the card brands. That's like 1% of volume for these international in some cases. Can you talk a little bit about how the card brands kind of treat international and what these assessments are like?
Well, I don't want to get too deep into the weeds about international transactions on this call, but I do want to talk a little bit about how the NIPTF is applied in the case of U.S. merchants accepting cards from non-U.S. cardholders. And in that case, you're right. There's a fee, approximately 1%. Both Visa and MasterCard have them for accepting these cross-border fees, right? That's one of the newly introduced categories, or at least introduced since the card networks went private and said, there's probably probably some income that we could be making off of these. And if you think about the types of these NIPTFs that are out there, one, the assessments, right, based on volume. Second one that you have is based on the number of transactions, right? Both Visa and MasterCard have authorization related ones. Visa charges, roughly a half cent less for debit than they do for credit. MasterCard charges the same, and to just quantify that, 1.95 cents for Visa, MasterCard on credit. Visa has a reduction to 1.55 on debit. In addition to that, you have the monthly fee or location fee. MasterCard's is constant at $1.25 per month for the location. Visa has this wild schedule. And have you guys heard of the term FANF?
Oh, 100%. We deal with it all the time. Yeah, the FANF table. It's funny, again, we had a merchant maybe 3 or 4 months ago, and a client that reached out and was like, what in the world? There's a $1,000 fee on here from Visa, and you're saying that that's a true pass-through. That does not exist. We had to send him the FANF table and show him as a card not present merchant that did like 60 million in buy or something like that. It was something crazy.
Yeah. So the fixed acquirer network fee, right? And at the extreme, that fee could be $70,000 a month, right? For the very largest merchants. And the schedule, right? You talk about the Visa schedule. It's dependent on the MCC, the card method, the volume, lunar cycle, and Taylor Swift ticket prices, right? It's got a huge set of contingencies.
Right.
That's one of the dependencies that's like, okay, how can a legacy acquirer incorporate all of those things into billing that out to the end merchant? And sometimes they can't.
Right.
So just let me just finish this thought,
sure.
Patty, and I'll come back to you. But so you think about the categories, right? So there's the monthly fee, the transactional fee, then there's the exception fees for things we talked about cross-border, right? There's certain of these NIPTFs that only apply to certain MCCs or dispute. And then there's the behavior modification fees that exist out there. Okay, think of taxes on cigarettes and alcohol designed to change the behavior. And within those, there's several different categories. You have the fees around authorization fidelity, transactions not matched to an authorization, auths not properly reversed, or reattempting an auth after a hard decline. And then you have things like fees around the dispute-related items, like allowing, this is a good one. Do you know that you can get an NIPTF if you have too many pages associated with your dispute?
Wow, that one I did not know about. That's a new one.
Wow. So and what is too many pages?
You will get an extra fee. And then there's, the outdated technology. If you're using MagStripe, you're going to get an NIPTF.
Yep, that one I knew about.
You should. To be honest, you should get an NIPTF.
Yeah, that one seems pretty logical. You've talked a lot about Visa, MasterCard, but what about the other card networks like Discover and Amex? Are there similar things there?
Yeah, so without getting too deep into them, they all have them. I think the biggest distinction is that Amex and Discover don't have the clout to charge for the monthly fees.
Okay, sure, because they don't have enough.
What about the PIN debit networks? We kind of always lump all those together as just PIN debit pass through, but like, do you consider that a similar kind of thing? Ken, I know they have some different things like that,
Yeah, so you've probably seen some of the PIN debit networks. They have annual fees.
Yeah, $20.
Try to explain that to a merchant.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to take this PIN debit network. Okay.
Right. And a lot of times it's crazy because we'll look back and it's like they haven't even done any volume on Shazam or whatever it is, and
they're paying that monthly fee.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is because they don't even understand how to use PIN debit, to be honest. I mean,
right. Sure.
Tell me in terms of particulars, do PayFacs pay these fees? And what about like single rate merchants? How does it apply to them?
Yeah, so it doesn't apply to micro merchants. So if you're under $200 on Visa, MasterCard on a monthly basis, you're not going to see that. But it does apply to PayFacs. Now, with that said, not all PayFacs are properly digesting that. But they do get these fees. And when those fees go up, the PayFac is either going to absorb that or they're going to have to increase the single rate to the end merchant. In the context of a single rate merchant, those fees tend to be higher, but they do encompass not only the higher interchange rates, but
Right.
also the NIPTFs that exist out there.
Sure. Yeah, I could see that. Sure. Now, how do processors manage the fees? I mean,
Not
that
as
has to
well
be
as
a
you would
major.
think.
Yeah.
Again, there's over 100 different items that are out there, and some platforms are averaging them or not passing them along in a proper basis. And I think that's what ISO should be looking at is, okay, I understand that part of my Schedule A cost are these pass-through fees, but they should be looking at to make sure that they're not subsidizing another portfolio that perhaps has way more international merchants than they have.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing we haven't talked about yet, Ken, that I think I'm sure you see a lot is, it'd be one thing if you could trust that every time you looked at a payment processing statement or a residual report, that everything that was listed as pass-through was pass-through.
Right.
But we both know that's not the case at all. Right. And so,
right.
yeah. And so I think anytime you have complexity, I think, especially in our industry, there's going to be certain processors that will leverage that complexity in order to slide in some additional margin undetected. What are your thoughts on that practice? I mean, that's something I've personally seen that really, over the last kind of 3 or 4 years, I've seen a lot more of that that's coming. It used to be just, oh, there's markup on the interchange table. I mean, it's so common now. Our system has an algorithm that can recognize it automatically and then sort it out. But then it's really tough with the card brands and things because it's so complex and, like you mentioned, so many variables.
Well, I guess we need to separate intentional dishonesty from a complexity that their system can't manage. And so setting aside intentional dishonesty, right? If you're working with a dishonest partner, stop.
Yeah, exactly. Right. You shouldn't be.
Yeah. So, but on the other side of that, if you're working with a processor that says, look, there's some complexity here, and I'm not fully able to give you a one-for-one, I'm not able to properly pass down to you exactly what the costs are. However, I'm willing to share the methodology that I'm using to give you the transparency into it. That's not an unfair place to be, right? You can understand that there are some limitations with the legacy processors, and if you're working with a good partner, they'll be open to you. At the same time, if you are seeing some outsized NIPTFs because perhaps the mother portfolio has far more international or merchants serving international cardholders than you, or perhaps some merchants that perhaps are a different risk type and as a result are receiving a larger share of these NIPTFs, then I think there's a potential opportunity to question the methodology, in a good, honest discussion. Let me give you a good example. I recently had a client, a very large merchant, and they were paying the equivalent of a Tesla every month.
Oh my gosh. in
excessive NIPTFs. Now, their processor was not doing them any favors at all. Their processor was doing them a disservice. They had really good rates. I mean, very attractive rates, but they were, as I said, paying a extra and enormously large bill to the NIPTFs. Visa, MasterCard loved them. I mean, I don't know. They should be getting gift baskets, right, regularly from Visa and MasterCard over this. In essence, what was happening is they were not accepting the dispute items that they had initially pushed back on. And as a result, they were dropping into arbitration. And with every one of those items, Visa charged $500 and MasterCard's charged $420. In every case, they were losing the arbitration, but because they did not accept the dispute before it went into arbitration, their processor allowed that process to continue, and they got hit with these very enormous NIPTFs.
Wow. That's
Wow,
crazy.
that's-
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
it absolutely is.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, so I guess last question here, and then I definitely want to learn more, for our audience about what you do and how they might potentially even work with you, or kind of what partnerships and connections you're looking for. But before we get to that, maybe you could share with us any final tips that you have for the ISOs and agents, right? So we've shared all this information. Obviously, it's way too much to cover in one podcast interview. I'm sure we could do 7 or 8 of them. But as they're seeing these, card brand type fees, network access, brand usage assessments, all these things, what should they be doing? Any tips or kind of action steps that our audience should kind of take away from this discussion?
Sure. So I think the first is to understand the abbreviations and nomenclature of NIPTFs, right? They can get with you and your company and say, hey, can you give me the description of all of the NIPTFs that you have within your system? Okay, and you should, you can, I'm assuming, be able to provide something like that. If they can't, there are resources that they're able to get some of that
I mean, now I'm gonna
information.
have to, because you just said that they're all gonna reach out to me, but that's okay. We'll figure it out. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, we
He
have
has lots
something
of
like
programmers. They'll figure it out.
Yeah, I'm gonna be calling somebody right after this. Hey, we gotta put this list together that Ken told everybody we had. No, I'm just kidding.
James, I have high expectations for you, right? I've heard such great things about
Thank
you
you.
that
Yeah, well.
I'm confident that you can be able to get that to them.
Excellent.
And to understand that these are different from Interchange, that
Right.
they're not
Right.
going to be returned back in the event of a credit or a chargeback, right? So
And they can't
you've
be
gotta
negotiated.
yeah, well, if you're Chase Bank, you can. It's a whole different
Yeah.
topic.
Right. Good luck on that, right?
But
Other than that,
normally they can't be negotiated.
they're not negotiable, and because of the way that the industry is evolving, these are becoming a bigger component of the expenses. We always talk about interchange and how insidious interchange is, but these fees are becoming a much larger component. So understand those. James, you brought up a good point about the type of merchant that you're getting, right? Is it serving international cardholders?
Right.
Potentially, being aware of that, and then understanding the driver behind these. And I talked about the different drivers behind those. So they should have an understanding on that. And then the methodology that their processor is using to pass those on. I think that's what
That's important. Yeah.
ISO and merchant can do to, one, understand, and then two, to minimize these fees, especially on the behavior modification ones, right?
Yeah.
Try to figure out a way to avoid those.
Yeah, the good news too, I mean, circling back to my 3-day stint in a hotel to figure this out, when I went on Google and I searched for the fees as they came up, I mean, it took a little searching to get this all, because, different processors call it different things, but I mean, there are really good resources out there. I mean, you can look it up, and even though it's not exactly public record from Visa, it does exist online somewhere, usually with some kind of an explanation of what's causing this. And if you're like me, and I'm sure Ken as well, you're probably gonna be very surprised when you realize what these are. And I remember, Ken, so many, probably 30 different types of fees. I thought, oh, this is just some bogus fee the processor threw on there. I never saw that before. Looked it up. Nope, sure enough, it was actually a fee from Visa, or actually from MasterCard, for the integrity fee or whatever it was that I didn't know about. And so yeah, it's there's a lot of good resources. So Ken, this has been so insightful. Before we let you go, tell us a little bit more about really what you're doing, and maybe how our audience could learn more, and maybe potentially even work with you on some things you're doing. So give us an update on that, if you would.
I will, but offline, I gotta convince my wife to let me go to a hotel in Vegas for 3 days to.
Good luck with that. Let me
Good
know how
luck,
that goes.
So just one of the projects that I'm working through right now, and hopefully I can share more about this at a separate event with the both of you, is trying to understand the impact that's going to be had on the industry through Visa's offering of direct authorizations to ISOs and acquirers. I think that's going to have a lasting and significant impact on a lot of folks, processors chief among those. But that will be interesting to see how that plays out, and I'm doing some deep dive there. In regards to my business,
can you give our audience the 30-second version of, like, what is that? What are you describing?
Yeah, so currently, if you wanted to buy an authorization, connect to a front end platform, you're going to one of the traditional platforms. You're going to Global, you're going to TSYS, Fiserv, or FIS. Well, now you can actually go direct to Visa and integrate into Visa to obtain an authorization to then connect with your backend for settlement.
And is MasterCard following suit and doing something similar, or are you saying you can run everything through Visa? Like, I'm assuming that's only for Visa transactions, right?
It's for both Visa and MasterCard transactions.
Oh,
really?
wow.
That's so interesting. So this is so cool. Wow, we
That's
definitely
really-
we need another episode about
Another
this. 'Cause
episode just for this, right?
Yeah, I was talking to somebody about it recently, and I was trying to wrap my head around it, and it's like, okay, I didn't quite get it. So that we need to talk about that. So go ahead, continue on. What else you got for us?
Yeah, so that's a current, I guess, work that I'm doing today, and would love to come back and share more as I'm able to
Sure.
dive deeper into that topic. Patty talked a little bit about the, I guess, semi-self-indulgent series of articles that I'm writing for the Green Sheet. And so the retrospectives, it's going to be a 3-parter. The first one's already dropped. The other 2 are coming out. But I shared a little bit about my history when I first started, right? And I've got very deep, pragmatic, practical experience on many different sides of the payments industry, right?
Yes, you do.
Working as an ISO, working within a bank, working with integration and certification, and then working with high risk as well as Main Street merchants. So my consulting practice is very steeped within the pragmatic, practical. I also do quite a bit of expert witness testimony for individuals and entities that have disputes within the payment space. So very steeped within the rules and very good at understanding how to counsel entities, how to avoid certain types of actions that I've seen unfortunately play out within the legal circle. I've been an expert witness for both civil and criminal cases that have been brought to forth by the U.S. Department of Justice. So that's where I think I'm very steeped and could assist folks where I don't necessarily play, right? Folks that maybe with some of the big consulting groups that do very polished slide decks, not necessarily my forte, but in terms of the pragmatic, the practical, and the experience.
Getting down in the trenches with the
that's where I'm able
techies.
to assist platforms, large merchants,
Great.
and entities looking to
That's
better
great.
optimize their business and think about how to increase their profitability while at the same time retaining and optimizing their asset value.
So for those who are interested in that and like, that's what I need to talk to somebody that's got this kind of payments expertise, where would they go to learn more about you and your consulting practice?
So thanks for asking. So certainly on LinkedIn, Ken Musante, as well as my website. Again, it's a long name, but it's not a complex one, but napapaymentsandconsulting.com.
napapaymentsandconsulting.com. Ken, it's been an absolute pleasure having you. Really appreciate your experience in the industry and sharing your insights with our audience today. I learned a few things, and I know our audience did as well. So thank you.
It's been an honor
Thanks a
to
bunch,
join the
Ken. I
both of
learned a
you.
lot.
So thank you, Patty. It's a pleasure connecting with you as always.
Hey everybody, this episode is sponsored by Nativia Banking, and there is a Nativia Business Conference that I'm going to. I'm going to be, moderating a panel. I think the very first panel of the conference, actually, but October 9th and 10th. It's in Miami. It's at the Seminole Guitar Hard Rock Hotel and Casino. Very cool. If you've never seen it before, just Google Seminole Guitar Hard Rock Hotel and Casino. Probably the coolest shaped building in the world.
Oh, really?
Literally, it's a hotel that's shaped like a guitar.
Like a guitar?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Can I stay?
yeah, it's pretty cool. So check it out. Again, I know it's coming up really quick as we air this, but if you're in the area, stop by, definitely come say hello to me. They're going to be, they have experts there from, they have people coming from MasterCard. They have somebody that's the director of payments and fintech at Google. A bunch of other people in the industry. Obviously, Vlad from Nativia will be there. Head of acquiring at Cross River. I'm just looking at a bunch of these. Managing director at UBS Bank, Wells Fargo will be there. Obviously, I'll be there. Many others. So lots of people. Somebody from Plaid is going to be there. So they've got they've really assembled a bunch of experts from kind of across the payments ecosystem.
Yes.
And so it's not really just a Nativia event, although obviously they'll have Nativia things there. My company, iSwamp, is going to have a booth there as well.
Okay.
But just something to come check out. So if you really want to see that, go over to conference.nativia.com. So it's conference.nativia.com. check out the conference, register for it, come check it out, and make sure you're there on the 10th of October and say hello to me after my panel discussion. So Patty, today I want to talk about a topic that I talked about maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, called merchant cost consulting. I thought it just kind of
I vaguely remember that.
Yeah, I think it goes really well with the interview we did today, which was very much in the weeds and talking about
Right.
kind of a payments expertise. And, you know, the reason I thought it would be good today is this. If you listen to that interview that we just did and you were like, I like that, that was really interesting, right? Or you said, I actually
What
understood
the
some of
heck?
that. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, if you were what the heck, you probably aren't going to enjoy this segment
Right,
either.
that's
Okay?
true.
But if you like the first part, okay, you know, one of the issues I find, Patty, and it's a growing trend, is that there are these payments experts out there, payments professionals that are on the sales side, the distribution side of the industry. And they've gotten to this point where they just kind of are like, well, you know, what am I going to do? I'm out here, I'm selling, you know, pizza shops and retail stores and you know, and auto repair, and I'm selling them on point of sale systems. And it's like, you're selling them on flat rate pricing or dual
Right.
price, whatever. And you're kind of like, what do I do with all this like payments expertise? You know, this is not really, I'm not really being utilized. And one of the things that I'm so passionate about, that I really believe, and we're actually, I'm kind of teasing this here, but we're working on some technology that's going to empower the industry to facilitate this in next year. But you know, there's this whole other world called merchant cost consulting. And it's this idea
Right.
where when you go to larger merchants, okay, you can help them reduce their cost with their current processor.
Right.
Okay. And this can be two ways you generate revenue off of this model. The first way is a fee-based model. This can either be where you take up a certain percentage of the savings that you provide to them, or you charge them X per month for your consulting expertise. But then the other thing is, of course, it can be a gateway long-term to actually getting the merchant processing business
Right.
as well.
Sure.
So once their contract's up, but you know, you're going to find, I think there's several trends coming together right now that make this very interesting to me. And which is why we're putting some money into building some tech around it. So the first trend is, again, this idea that payments expertise is mainly needed for these larger merchants.
Right.
However, and it might say large, I mean, really anybody doing over $250,000 a month in processing right now, you know, this is something where this is meaningful. If you understand what we just talked about, you understand interchange optimization, things of that nature,
Right.
you know, and you can identify, hey, there's markup here, there's optimization here, there's things you can do to stop getting charged this particular card brand fee or whatever. That can be very meaningful. You know, a merchant doing $250,000 a month in processing, you might be able to save them several $1,000s a month, if not more, if you know what you're doing in the payment space without them switching providers. So
right, and they'll be really happy, and maybe down the road you'll
right,
get their
you get the right, and in the meantime, you charge them $500 a month
right
for your consulting, right? And
to
every
save
month you're
them
going to check their
several
statement.
thousand a month.
Right, it's a kind of a no-brainer. But the other trend, Patty, that I'm noticing that I think is really impactful here is with integrated payments. You know, getting a merchant, especially a medium to large merchant, to switch processing is a really, really big deal. It's a big ask. You know, you're going in there and saying, hey, I know you're doing, you know, $7 million a month in processing across 20 locations, and you've got point of sale systems installed at all 20 that only integrate with this one processor. How about we switch?
Yeah.
Well, what do you mean? You're going to have to like replace all the point of sale systems. And, you know, it's a big ask.
Big ask.
Right. And so what's interesting is it's much easier to say, hey, what I do is I charge, you know, $500 a month, $1,000 a month, whatever. And I work with merchants to decrease their costs with their current company. I also do have processing partners that I can recommend if necessary, but that's not my objective. My objective is just to lower your cost of card acceptance.
Help you save money.
Right, through expertise. And for those of you that have never done it before, the thing I love about it is literally the easiest business ever to get into. I mean, just go to a medium to large merchant and tell them this, and tell them that it's $500 a month, make a little Word document or whatever. And and then from there, the cool thing about it is now with tools like ISOAMP, the company I own, you know, you head over to getisoamp.com, you know, we leverage these things where you can upload their statement and get it broken down in a spreadsheet. Now you're going to have to do some things with that spreadsheet because it's designed for a sale. It's not designed for consulting. And that's what we're going to be hopefully rolling out down the road. But, you know, you're gonna have to do some things with that spreadsheet. But if you're a payments expert, that's easy. You know exactly what to do. Every month you get paid $500 to sit down for 30 minutes, look over the spreadsheet, analyze it. Now, initially you work with them on contract negotiations and let's reach out to your processor. Here's what you need to do. So there's a lot of different degrees with this, but the main thing I want to point out today quickly, Patty, is I just want people thinking about this.
Yes.
It should be in the back of your mind. Again, if you're somebody that listened to that interview and you said, oh, I like that, that sounded interesting. I promise you, there are 50 businesses very near you with a headquarters within 2-hour drive from you, at least 50 to 100 businesses that do a lot of payment processing. Okay. And those businesses would probably all be willing to pay $500 a month, $1,000 a month to somebody who really knows their stuff and understands how to work with a processing company, not to switch them, but just to get them back to their negotiated contract rates, to identify interchange optimization, to remove non-interchange prices and fees that are unnecessary, like all of that. So just keep that concept on your radar screen so that you start thinking about that the next time you interact with a really large merchant, if you're a payments expert. And then stay tuned, and hopefully I'll have some interesting and exciting things to announce in 2024 about what I'm doing along those lines to kind of empower the industry.
So James, small business users of Square and Cash App found themselves in a lurch for the better part of a day, and even actually into the weekend after that, back in early September. Thousands of merchants were unable to process payments for, like I said, better part of September 8th and into the weekend that followed that. I went on a couple of social media sites to see what people were saying about it, and
they were unhappy.
They were not happy, but the thing that they were most unhappy about was lack of communication.
Yeah, always. That's what it always is.
Right? Here's one guy said, I don't think the outage is the issue, it's the lack of communication.
Right.
Another one, no announcements, no notifications, no updates, and they shut down all lines of communication. This is a big deal. You know, I mean, people were, and those were the nicer ones that I picked out because I didn't want to embarrass anybody. But,
right.
Yeah, as an aside, I gotta note, I must note that in the comments, one of the places I went to was called Down Detector. They detect, they run stats for all the websites that are down, and there was an agent in there. Every 10 or 15 comments she'd put in, hey, it's really bad, but this doesn't have to happen to you again. And I was like really impressed. It's like,
it's funny, Patty. I think I actually know who that is. So I think that agent, I was talking to them like a few days ago with one of my consulting clients. So I think I know who that is. I don't know. At least I know an agent who was doing this.
It could be. It could very well be, because I think that, there's probably a lot of ISOs and agents out there that are calling on local Square merchants.
Absolutely.
If they aren't, they should be,
Right.
Because, it's something I'd be considering if I were out there.
Yeah.
Now, apparently the leadership at Block, which is Square's parent, was concerned enough about the optics and the potential loss of clients. They said the problem was a DNS, domain name system malfunction.
Yeah.
But soon after the fix was announced, Block said Square's CEO, Alyssa Henry, would be stepping down in early October. Jack Dorsey, the tattooed entrepreneur, I can't help it. The first time I ever saw him, he had tattoos on both arms, and he was wearing a short sleeve shirt, speaking to an acquirers association.
Yeah, that sounds exactly like Jack Dorsey.
That's exactly like Jack, So he's going to be taking over the added duties now of Square CEO. Now, speaking of leadership shifts, Chris Comparato, is that how you pronounce it? The CEO of the restaurant tech provider Toast.
Right.
Is stepping down, being replaced by co-president and CEO Aman Narang, who's also, been at the helm for a while.
Right.
No reason was given for the departure, but you'll recall that Toast had its own issue with optics back in June, when it announced that 99-cent customer fee for orders placed through its online ordering channels. While the fee was eventually scrapped, it didn't occur until after there was an uproar.
Right.
Pretty
and again, a lack of communication as well.
Again, a massive lack of communications. Now, during an earnings call in August, the CEO described the move as a mistake. Yeah, you think so?
Right. It's funny, Patty. I still, in retrospect, I talked to a CEO of a competitor recently, and I still am scratching my head over that whole thing. I mean, you know,
It's just the way they did it, James, you
well,
know?
but here's the thing I scratch my head over. They did all of this and took all this risk for what?
Right.
It wasn't a 99-cent charge on every order. It was
No.
a 99-cent charge for online orders through the Toast platform, which makes up like 3% of
I
their
was going to say
orders.
maybe 10%, but
It's
yeah,
not even close to that because most
Yeah.
people still order through DoorDash and Uber Eats, which they integrate
Right.
without, they don't have a per transaction fee on those. It was just the people that order
just the
through
Toast.
the Toast
Yes.
thing.
Channels.
And it's like,
Yes.
why would you go through all of that? I can't remember. I did the math on it. 'Cause
That's
they're publicly traded, and it was a trivial amount of revenue that they would have gotten,
yes.
even if they would have pulled it off. Which of course they had to pull it back. So I'm still scratching my head over
I
that whole
still
thing.
scratch my and I remember when you were trying to do the math on that, and it was like
It just wasn't a big deal. I can't remember what it was, but for them it was like, you
yeah,
know,
I don't remember either. But for
yeah,
given what the
maybe
company's
$500,000
financials
a month or something like that. I can't remember the numbers, but it was very trivial for Toast. I mean, it wasn't a
Yes.
game changer at all. And to me, it's like, well, if you're gonna risk the wrath of the whole industry, you might as well make some money while you're doing it. So I don't know. I was a little
Right.
my pragmatism was offended by that move.
Well, especially for a company like Toast that they claim they're on track to generate more than $1 billion in revenue this year.
Well, right.
Okay.
And so
So
something where it's going to
what's
generate like $500,000 a month or whatever, it's just not a big deal.
right? It's like, yeah.
Yeah. So
But here's something interesting, James. While I was researching the changes at Toast,
yeah.
I came across a press release from the tech giant Oracle.
Okay.
Okay. Now, I had no idea. They have a food and beverage unit.
Okay.
Who knew that? But
Right.
they are rolling out a new restaurant management platform called Oracle Restaurants, that the way to describe it, it is a direct competitor with Toast.
Really?
Yeah, they said they developed it for independent restaurants. It
Hmm.
includes POS hardware and software, payment processing, and online ordering, all for one monthly fee.
Yeah. Well, no surprise there. People see the kind of money that can be
They
made
see
in
the kind of money
you
that
know,
can be made. Why not? I
Yeah.
mean, we talk a lot about ISVs, right? Well,
Right.
that's what Oracle works with. I mean,
Right. And so now Oracle is going to create basically their own ISV. And, and a lot of, I'll tell you what it is, Patty, a lot of it, we'll see more and more of this. It's a lot like back when the .com thing was happening, and
Yeah.
you'd have like, Toys R Us or these other companies where they would
Right.
literally spin off and make a ToysRUs.com or what, they'd make their .com and they would do it as a separate company just because the valuations on a .com were so much bigger than the
Right.
valuations on a traditional business. And so today you look at Oracle, I haven't looked at them lately, but I'm sure their price to earnings ratio is pretty low.
I'm
'Cause
sure it is, yeah.
they're at old time cash
Old
cow.
school, right? Yeah.
Right. And so now they're like, well, wait a second, we're going to start Oracle Restaurant and we're going to have the same business model as Toast. Well, Toast price to earnings ratio is ridiculously high, right? Because it's like all these expectations. So I think you're going to see a lot of companies, they want to get the stock price, the organizational value
Oh, yeah,
out of
I
it.
think you're right. I wouldn't,
Yeah.
wouldn't surprise me to see, several of these like old school tech
Yep.
companies
Yep.
trying to
So
get in on it. So
very interesting. Well, thanks for the update and all that. A lot of things happening in the payments world right now. That's for sure.
oh, there are indeed.